Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome you at this panel, which is devoted to the state of transatlantic relationship. And let me introduce the panelists. Next to me is Laura Thurden, is from John McCain, director of John McCain Institute. Welcome.
Thank you.
We have Ralph. Sorry. We have Ralph Fick from Germany, from the Center for Liberal Modernity. Welcome. We have His Excellency Norman Eisen, you remember him for serving here as US Ambassador in Prague. Currently representing Brookings Institution, American think tank. Welcome. And we have Sigita Stuberga from Latvian Center for Atlantic Relationship. Welcome. So my name is Jan Macháček. I am chairman of the Strategio Institute. I am also a fellow in GlobSec. And I also serve as a foreign policy advisor to President Pavel. So we know that current state of Atlantic relationship is a little bit complicated or different than what it used to be. For decades, it's definitely turbulent, chaotic, and little bit less predictable than that it used to be. And so let me start with Laura. You're representing here John McCain Institute, and John McCain, as all we know, was a really devoted pro-Atlantic politician. And what would he say, still being among us, about current turbulences and turmoil in Atlantic relationship?
Thank you so much, and thanks to the organizers of Forum 2000. It's great to be back in Prague. Now, to your difficult question, it's really hard to speak on behalf of someone, but we can look at Senator John McCain's legacy. And I think that based on his staunch defense of liberal democratic values, human rights, he was in the Maidan during Ukraine's colorful revolution. He supports democracy and human rights in Georgia, where I used to live for 7 years. And he was a big believer in basically pretty much a bipartisan consensus in the United States for the past 80 years. And I think to say that we're in a difficult time, and I don't mean to be the skunk at the garden party, but I think we've seen not just a different time, but a radical rupture from what we were. And we haven't always been perfect, and we've at least leaned in that values and interests are one and the same, and that the more countries around the world that are free and democratic benefits the United States and serves our interests. We haven't, again, always lived up to those standards. But what we're seeing now is a completely new model that is foreign, and I think would be very foreign to Senator McCain. It is one that's based on grievance, zero-sum transactions. It's based on, who has the cards and who doesn't, who can make a deal that will benefit not necessarily the United States, but the Trump family in a lot of cases, who can come to the table and offer, whether it's a jet or golf courses or whatnot. So it's really been a radical rupture. And I think it's the opposite of what Senator McCain would have stood for. And I would also like to just quickly say that one key part of this rupture is the evisceration of our foreign aid. And foreign aid that supported democracy and media organizations in Moldova, where I just was. These are the groups that prevented this hybrid warfare onslaught from Russia. It was through their civic work in the regions. It was through their independent reporting. It was through their election observation, their cyber training, their work on combating this massive onslaught of Russian hybrid warfare tools. And now we are distancing ourselves from that completely. And by doing so, in some ways, we are putting our thumb on the scale of the other side. And one very telling anecdote of how we've changed and how we've departed from a Mackenzian viewpoint. When I was in Moldova, I was sitting with diplomats from the EU and a representative from the United States. Of course, we don't have ambassador there. But every single European diplomat saw the stakes very clearly in Moldova. They were like, this is about freedom and democratic Moldova versus Russia. Free and democratic Moldova versus Russia. Every single European diplomat. It got to the American representative, and he said, meh, we don't have a dog in this fight. And I think that encapsulates so much of what we're dealing with. And so, in answer to your question, I think it's not just a departure of McCain's beliefs and ideals, which was leaning in, which was defending democracy, which is linking values and interests, but a rupture of, I would say, a bipartisan consensus since World War II.
Thank you. Can I have a question for Norman now? Is it possible to transform the relationship which was based on values and long-term history of sort of friendship and civilizational brotherhood, etc., to purely transactional approach? But maybe transactional is also not correct expression. It's a mixture also. There are attempts of transactional approach plus a lot of unpredictable chaos, right? Like, so what's your take on it?
Jan, panel, my fellow panelists, and my wonderful Prague friends, it's so great to be back in this beautiful city that has seen the history of so many foreign policies over the centuries. I'm reminded you have your current foreign minister, very, very wonderful, I think exceptionally distinguished in the brilliant foreign ministers that Czechia has had. Perhaps second, someone was telling me, an expert was telling me, perhaps second only to the great Karl Schwarzenberg, who was foreign minister when I arrived. And I went to pay him a visit, Jan, and I think our conversation foretold the answer to your question. I am a very strong idealist. I'm from the extreme idealistic school, values-based school of international relations. And I went to talk to Minister Schwarzenberg, and we were discussing that. And of course, he had a very values-based, his life was a values-based opposition to communism and support of Czech democracy. But he said to me, "You're going too far, Norman." I was lectured. I had the good fortune to be mentored by the greats of that first generation of post-Soviet Czech freedom, the dissidents, President Havel, Schwarzenberg, my wonderful second family, the Klimas, Ivan Klima, his family is here today. And Kari said to me, "Norman, you're going too far." And he reminded me of Lord Palmerston's famous adage. And I think it's very apropos as we answer these questions about values-based versus transactional versus chaos-based transatlantic relations. Lord Palmerston's adage that nations do not have permanent friends.
They have interests.
They have interests. And if even Schwarzenberg was of that position, Jan, who am I to come here and say that there has not always been an element of values and of interests and even of a touch of chaos? Look at the whiplash. When I came as ambassador, it was in the aftermath of Bush giving the radar base and Obama taking it away as part of the hope for rapprochement with Russia. Perhaps that decision doesn't look so good in retrospect. So obviously there has been a dramatic departure, and we are going to have to all adapt to the new reality. But there's an element of continuity as well. I would say that the last thing I'll say to answer your question is, obviously, I continue to believe in a values-based approach. I abhor those on either side of the Atlantic who back away from that. But it is going to be incumbent on all of us, as part of the reason I'm here, part of the reason I insisted to Brookings that I wanted to come and represent the United States at Forum 2000. And I've been coming once a month to the region because I think the rest of us are going to need to do more to pick up the slack of what's lost in that values base. I will say one last thing. Am I going on too long? Should I stop?
One last thing is fine.
One last thing. Since we have Laura, we have a representative of the McCain Institute. I was very lucky in my teachers of the last generation. In synagogue, I sat next, for a quarter of a century, I sat next to Senator Joe Lieberman. And every Saturday, instead of praying, or in addition to praying, he would explain to me what had really gone on in the Senate and the world that week. And some of you know he visited us often, and I had the pleasure to introduce him and reintroduce him around Prague. So the Lieberman, McCain, and Lindsey Graham, who's changed quite a bit, but the three of them were also teachers of mine. And one important lesson that Senator McCain and Senator Lieberman had was never give up, to keep going. That's what sustained Senator McCain in his time, he told me, in his time as a prisoner of war. No matter how bad it got, never give up, no matter how many compromises you have to make. Some of his experiences were tremendously painful. So I think we need to maintain that philosophy, particularly with values-based diplomacy. Sorry,
Okay,
I reminisced excessively.
Never give up. I saw Ralph reacting on when interests were mentioned. So perhaps could you speak a little bit about how you define European interest with Atlantic link? Because the trouble is that it seems to me that Donald Trump and his team, they are quite skillful in mixing agendas, whereas we Europeans are absolutely unable to mix agendas. So is it in our interest to respond to precise what I want to ask about, to be a little bit softer or friendlier with trade policies, because we need still, and for many years we will still need American military protection. So how is it, what is exactly in the interests of us Europeans?
Thanks a lot, Jan. And I've been for 2000 for so long time, so frequently that I almost forget to say thanks for inviting me. And great to be here again. I was a little bit intrigued to follow up on what Norman was starting to think about the relationship, the tensions, the conflict between interests and values. I would say, okay, if we would play these two categories against the interests and values, unfortunately, I think values finally would lose. But the interesting point, I would say, in the debate about a value-based foreign international policy was that a value-based international order is at the very interest of the very interest of Western democracies. This was the core assumption, that it is in our interest to promote this kind of multilateral, cooperative, normative international system with open markets, with transnational institutions as the keepers of these their international law. So, and the interesting question is if this is the world of the past. Yeah, if we are now entering a completely different international reality where all these assumptions are getting hollowed out because completely other players are now not only entering the scene, dominating international politics, which are following a totally different script. China, Russia, Iran, and the key question is, of course, what is about the US? And here I think one of the I stumbled about the announcement of our panel in the program that we are still in a common in a relationship of shared values between Europe and the US. And of course, if you may think in the long lines, and if you take into consideration societies, this may be true. But if you look into governments, the common value base is eroding rapidly. And not only in terms of international politics, but also in terms of domestic politics. Yeah, I don't see that the Trump administration is believing and promoting the same values as European liberal democracies. And Trump and Vance probably would even see the term liberal democracy as a provocation, because they are in the camp of illiberal democracy, which, of course, is a kind of oxymoron. Yeah, because if you take away from democracy the liberal elements, the balance of power, the independence of judiciary, the independence of the academia, political pluralism, if you take that away, it becomes only a kind of Potemkin village, a facade for the drift towards authoritarian rule. And Trump's buddies in Europe are Orban and the other anti-liberal right-wing, they're populists. Yeah? And he's very disappointed that Putin is not willing to behave as his buddy. He has no clue what the war in Ukraine is about. No clue. So yes, I'm afraid transatlantic relations are becoming more transactional, but then, of course, for Europe, the question is, if we want to be taken seriously, what do we have to offer? Yeah, if you want to make deals with Trump, if you want to engage him, you have to be strong. Strong in economic and military terms. And we are still a long way away from that. Yeah, look at what's going on in the Middle East these days. What's about Europe? Europe has reached its stage of utter irrelevance. This is the bitter truth. So if we want to become a serious vis-a-vis for Washington, we have to get our things together as Europeans. Yeah? Militarily, economically, it's also an economic issue. We have almost stagnation all over the place. In economically, we are falling behind China and the US in terms of digital technologies. Okay, I can talk for hours about this state of European democracy, but I think we are in a paradox. The US is still, to a certain extent, the indispensable power. And we have a lot of difficulties to struggle if the US are fading away. Look at Ukraine, yeah? Without the US, it's becoming extremely challenging. But at the same time, we can no longer rely on the US. This is the bitter truth.
Thank you very much. How is it seen from the perspective of the Baltic states and Latvia at first? Baltic states, if we speak about transactional approach, because it's not only about values, it's also this transactional approach that if other members of NATO, excluding your countries, promised recently to pay 5% GDP for defense, this is a reality in Baltic states. You have always been very responsible in this respect. So, but even then, doesn't seem sometimes to be enough for current U.S. administration because there are attempts to limit U.S. military presence. So, how do you feel that what more you should do, like to improve the Atlantic relationship and your own security situation in this respect?
So first of all, I guess I would like to say that in order to continue, and it's not like Baltic's position, but rather me as more pragmatic and less idealistic, that for me, Trump is not only source of our problem. Let's start with that. We have a bunch of problems here in Europe. And what I hear, that exactly if we discuss 5% or whatever, I think quite often now we hide behind this rhetoric that Trump is only source of our problems. So basically, the same as we hide that Trump is the one who is kind of only source of democratic kind of decrease. No, let's look at Europe itself. Let's look what issues we do have. And when we complain about Trump, whether we really complain about democratic decrease or we complain about loss of attention towards our security. And this is what I see far more and far often than this democratic debate or values debate. For me, quite often, exactly values debate is just umbrella for in a way hiding the real concern of Europeans. And this is unfortunate, because if we look on the democratic decrease in Europe, we need to pay attention to this much more. And let's look on the results of elections, for example, or the sentiments which are arising here. And then we will have a far more detailed discussion. And it's not only Trump who brings us to the world where dominant ideology is going to be nationalism. It's not only Trump bringing us to the world where the logic of countries' engagement is spheres of influences. It's not only Trump who is spreading this state-centric bias around. And this is what I'm missing in the debate.
Okay, thank you. So I would have now a little bit provocative question for Norman. Shouldn't we specify what kind of values we speak about? Because there might be some misunderstanding. Because since mainstream values before Trump came to power for the second time, where a lot of, I would call them progressive values or woke values, were overemphasized, I would say. But shouldn't we seek more common values which we can share with conservatives also? I mean, if we speak about liberal democracy, it might be better to speak about constitutional democracy, checks and balances, and these kind of values which are shared equally with progressives and conservatives, because it seems to me that very often we are able to speak about value-based order and we don't specify what kind of values we talk about. And referring to Mr. Schwarzenberg, what you mentioned before, you know that you yourself are very active in this, like Prague Pride, LGBTQ, whatever, whereas position of current US embassy, by the way, is the opposite, that employees there are not recommended to participate in these things. So isn't it the like counter-reaction to all these things?
You know, Jan, in a sense, you could say that the entire history of our civilization is the attempt to specify those values. And generations of philosophers, your countryman Immanuel Kant, his whole career was dedicated to it. And still the people don't agree what his answer to your question was. I think we have to distinguish when you talk about checks and balances, those are structures. Those are means to an end. Checks and balances are not something that is inherently valuable. There's a set of ideas, really they're Enlightenment ideas that were articulated in the response to the post-monarchical era in England, in France, in the United States, in their respective revolutions, and so the values that underlie those ongoing projects. Like my first question, I'm going to look at the historical vicissitudes. I've just published a paper at Brookings thinking about this panel. Laura was a reader for the papers, so she can attest. I worked in advance that it went up this morning. Global democracy is more resilient than you may think. And my argument would be that there actually is a fair amount of coherence. When we did Prague Pride, nobody was forced to participate in Prague Pride. There's actually a certain sense in which it is a neoliberal or even a libertarian idea of providing an array of opportunities for expression. It's the value, I would argue, the most fundamental value that binds us is the value of freedom. And it's free, and that runs through the concept of personal freedom, of political freedom to be able to choose. We had a free and fair election in the United States. It was an expression of the popular will of about 200 plus thousand people in 3 states. If they had changed their vote, the election would have gone the opposite way. But that was the free expression. So personal freedom, political freedom, free markets, that's another shared value. And when we take that triumvirate of values under the rubric of freedom, I would argue those are very fundamental, large structures. When we critique any of the partners in the transatlantic relationship vis-a-vis those values, we're reaffirming their endurance. And look, when I was ambassador, one of my mottos was also one that is very foundational to Europe vis-a-vis President Trump. And you could say it's either it's both an interest and a value. And that is, we wanted Europe, I often said, the Europeans should meet their 2% of GDP, NATO, preparedness. You can, now of course it's 5% with some soft spending, infrastructure spending in there. So I return to those commonalities. I actually think there's a lot of bad things for Europe, but I'll echo Sigita a little bit in saying, you know, as a friend of Europe, that I encourage Europe to ask the hard questions. It may actually turn out to be a positive for Europe, that there is this insecurity that forces the Europeans finally to take true, full, equal, co-equal autonomy on defense. I just hope that Mr. Putin doesn't take advantage of that 5 to 10 year ramp. That's why support for Ukraine is so important, because it ties him up. I sat in on Carl's panel, the prior panel here on Ukraine, and you know, it ties him up while Europe ramps. And I think Europe has been successful. It's a peculiar site because it goes back a little bit to the post-Enlightenment, the pre-Enlightenment monarchical realm. But Europe has learned how to talk to Trump as an imperial figure.
Okay, so Lorena, a lot have been said because you were the first speaker. Do you want to react to some of that?
Sure.
And also, since you represent this more like, I would say, like traditional Republican point of view, do you agree that, or what's your take on the values? Like, do you also think that checks and balances and rule of law and stuff are like kind of like technical issues and not a value?
Yeah, I agree pretty much with what Norm said. I think we could get tied up, and by the way, checks and balances and constitutionalism is liberalism. I mean, let's not get ourselves in a knot of liberalism equaling progressivism, because it doesn't. But I think more accurately, the way Norm outlined this broader picture of freedoms. And I think what's interesting, and I can't remember who said this, but you know, we support freedom around the world so that we don't have to fight and we don't have to use weapons. And so that's coming back to my original point about why values are interests, is those investments in a free world is just eventually saving us in the long run, because everything will come home to roost. And the fact that you don't have a liberal democracy in, say, Hungary is causing all sorts of problems, for example, for Ukraine. So these things have ripple effects, and what happens in one place affects us all. But I do want to pivot a little bit, because, yes, I'm thrilled at the idea of this being Europe's time to shine and building their own superstructures or defense capabilities. But I would like to, as an American Democrat, lowercase d, make a plea not to abandon the transatlantic relationship. And we talk about a transatlantic relationship, rightly so, at this sort of nation-state level. But a transatlantic relationship, I'm sorry, I'm a democracy practitioner. I lived overseas my whole life, basically, my whole life, working with civil society groups, working with political parties, working with parliaments, working with mayors' offices. And there are layers of alliances. And I think we need to think, and I really don't want my European friends to abandon America. We can build transatlantic alliances based on a city-state level. I sit on the board of the European Capitals for Democracy, where they were behind cities like Budapest and Istanbul. Despite what the national government was like, it doesn't mean that there isn't democracy taking place at the subnational level. Okay, look at the political party level. I would love to see a liberal, lowercase d, democratic response to CPAC, for example. So we have this movement of illiberal, anti-democratic leaders from the US and Europe meeting, sharing experiences, training, funding one another, supporting, providing advice on how to gerrymander or do this or that. Where's our alternative to that? Why aren't we allying? And this isn't, as our friend from Latvia said, this isn't an American problem. We are in this place right now, but other countries are going through the same thing and could end up in a similar road. So we need to stick together. And finally, civil society organizations. And I have to tell you that I moved back to the US only a little while ago, and I'm meeting democracy organizations, American democracy organizations that Norm knows well. And for the first time, there's this big interest in, what did you guys do? I want to meet some Poles. I want to meet some Hungarians. I want to meet civic actors on what tactics they used. And so there is this big desire. So don't forget about us. We could really use your assistance and you really use your help. And I think it's a great moment in a way, because America's always had so much hubris and, oh, we're the teacher, not the student. I think the shoe's on the other foot here. And we could really use some assistance. And we've always looked at democracy assistance as this like development recipient country thing. This is ridiculous. We are all facing democratic decline. Northern countries, global majority. So we need to, this learning needs to go both ways, and this assistance needs to go both ways. And so we have to stop thinking about alliances just at the nation state level, and if you've got a bad government, oh, doors closed. No, let's build other alliances. Thank you.
Okay, very much agree with yes. Laura that we should use all channels beyond big government to maintain and to revive transatlantic relations. You mentioned it all. Yeah, the scientific cooperation, scholarships,
that's right.
City partnerships, business to business cooperation, exchange between think tanks, all these civil society ties. I think we should invest much more in that right now. Yeah, not to give up the US and not to give us up mutually. Yeah, so, second, also agree that, and here I think Europe has to be in a driver's seat. We must try to create international, global alliances of democracies. Yeah, it's not enough to focus on ourselves. Of course, we have to do a lot of homework to make Europe strong again. But it's not sufficient as a global player and as a counterweight to the authoritarian challenge. Not only and not most by Washington, but by Beijing and Moscow. And they are trying to building alliances too. Yeah, and if you look to Ukraine is fighting against an authoritarian alliance, not only against Russia. There is North Korea, there is Iran, there's Belarus, and there is China behind the scenes. And we have to catch up to build alliances of democracies to defend our interests and our values. The critical point, I think, was mentioned by Norman, was just a side remark when you said the critical period when there is a certain vulnerability for Europe. These are probably the next years before Europe really has ramped up its defense capabilities. And here the most critical point is, of course, Article 5 of NATO. Can we still rely when push comes to shove, can we still rely on the US that it will stand to its commitments based on Article 5 NATO? And we must not allow Putin to test this. Yeah, this is the biggest threat to European security and for an all-out war. And this is also not only because that it is so important to stand with Ukraine and to make Ukraine so strong that it can push back the Russian aggression. Ukraine today is the protection shield for Europe. And this is still not really, it has not fully arrived at our politics, that this is about us, this is about European security and the future of European democracy in Ukraine.
Okay, you mentioned that Europeans are partially blamed for their authoritarian leaders and nationalism, etc. So what should be our reaction to when current US administration is openly giving support to, I don't know, we had a visit of Chief of Department, Secretary of Homeland Security in Poland, recommending to Poles who they should vote for. We had J.D. Vance in Germany supporting AfD. So should we react for this like with a poker face because we are dependent as far as the security, so we should shut up, or what should be our proper reactions for this phenomenon?
I think European leaders are masterly reacting at the moment. They have learned how to react and how to engage with current Trump administration. But what should we do? I wouldn't speak much about how we should react to Trump, this or that decision or rhetorics. I would like to continue my narrative, which I started, that basically what I'm missing in the debate about values, etc., and it is very much reflected also on what should we do, is that in all this debate about freedoms, which is super important, no doubt, I agree on each point, but what we are missing in Europe is also citizen duties. We speak a lot about our freedoms, and it's great, but what about citizen duties? How many Europeans are ready to defend their democracies? How many Europeans are ready to defend their states, even by taking weapons in hands if needed? Have we grown up generation which is ready to fight for freedom? And I'm not sure anymore if I look on statistics. But to defend Europe does not mean only to build up our military capabilities. It is also about willing to defend Europe, to defend our countries, to defend our statehood. And this is what is my concern. And it is very much reflected about NATO different articles. It's not only about Article 5. Before Article 5, there are several other articles. Mm-hmm. And we have to, before activating Article 5, we need to take care of ourselves at first, and then we can demand for Article 5. And then another point which I wanted to reflect was about this coalition of democracies. Indeed, I think we need to think beyond this traditional view on transatlantic relations, because traditionally, when we think of NATO, when we think of transatlantic relations as the kind of system which supports not only democratic resilience but also our security, what we are missing is that it should be, and it was mentioned already in here, that it shouldn't be only about this traditional core of Western countries. We really need to look for a new network of like-minded democracies. And it doesn't mean to replace United States with someone. No, it means to find additional actors. Like, for example, let's look on Argentina at the moment in Latin America. When Argentina is expressing will to cooperate, Europe is continuing to be reluctant. How often we hear Europeans to speak of new forms of transatlantic relations, how often we take other middle powers in other regions in this discussion about global security, about democratic values, etc. This is what we need to do, and not focus so much only on how we will react in short term to Trump. We are so much relying on goodwill of our partner, and I still believe that United States is our partner, but Europe is used to simply rely on goodwill. But our partner does not have to serve all the time to European interests.
Thank you. I think it's very important what you said, but I will have to ask another short-term Trumpian question, like Laura. Why do you think that Trump's approach to Middle East and peace seems to be quite successful, or he's devoted to it, even though we can discuss it, whatever, there are different opinions about it, but at least he is trying, he has some professional team behind it, which is the... Why is it so sharply contrasting with his very chaotic and unsuccessful approach to Russia and Ukraine and Russian-Ukrainian war and possible ceasefire? If he would approach this with the same effort and with the same professional team behind it, dealing with it, why is that there's such a huge contrast with this?
I actually don't know. I mean, but I have to say, I mean, obviously credit where credit is due. And the fact that we've seen the hostages released today is an amazing achievement of the administration for making that happen. I mean, there's no question. I mean, there's multiple theories out there about why that is. Was it that, in fact, maybe the bull in the china shop is sometimes a useful strategy? But why it doesn't work with Russia and Ukraine? Well, first of all, I'm not sure you have any... I am sure that you don't have a willing party at all. I mean, I don't think Russia is at all interested in peace, and I don't think they would ever... So I don't know what you're even talking about when we say negotiation, because or talk about getting to a peace solution with a country like Russia.
Well, we can speak about peace through strength, because it's...
Peace through strength,
Peace through strength, he understands it in the Middle East, and he doesn't seem to...
He's threatened to in 2 weeks do something, and I have no idea why this is holding back. He has made he talks out of two sides of his mouth, right? So some days he's saying that Zelensky caused the war and NATO caused the war and Zelensky has no cards, and then then he will change his tune another day and talk more forcefully about arming Ukraine and sending the weapons needed, but nothing's really materialized yet. And I personally viewed what happened in Alaska as a catastrophe. So that didn't get anywhere. Then it looked like he was irritated. I really don't have an answer to that question. Why it worked in one place and not another, and what it is about Russia in particular that Trump seems so hesitant about and has for some time.
So I would ask the similar question, Ralph. So what are your reflections about this?
It's a very interesting question, because I think you can see the differences here quite clearly. First, Trump, in my view, was and still is misreading Russia completely. When you hear him talking about his friend Putin, and the Ukrainians should never have started the war.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know if I should start to cry or to scream. So, but basically there is no understanding of the nature of the Russian regime, of the character of the conflict, what is at stake, not only for Europe, but also for US. And it seems to be different. And he was never willing, as you already said, really to put in the political and military weight of the US in that endeavor. And it seems to be different in the Middle East. Here he did what we never expected. Yeah, he had a strategic vision. He had the patience through his diplomatic ambassadors to build a coalition, and a very remarkable coalition. The president of Indonesia will tomorrow visit Israel. Can you imagine what that means? The biggest Muslim, the president of the biggest Muslim country will be visiting Israel, which signal this is. He managed to bring in Turkey and Qatar into to back his peace plan. So he was building the coalition, isolating then Hamas and Iran. This was, and in addition, his, I would say, quite solid support for Israel, yeah? and Israel's military strength. This had been the preconditions to move things. And we are missing all these elements when it comes to Europe.
So how are you reflecting in the US and your friends in the Democratic Party if you see European leaders and NATO leaders like expressing huge gratitudes to Mr. Trump, and sort of when we visited NATO summit, he was offered by Dutch king to sleep in his palace, and so all this. Is it funny from your perspective, or you understand that some of our leaders have to take this responsibility to speak with Mr. Trump like with the emperor who demands these kind of things, or what are your reflections on this?
I think that the foreign policy of the European nations, regrettably, has to reflect the reality that these forms of flattery actually seem to work. I certainly would not say, as a matter of pride, that Europe should sacrifice continued support for Ukraine, and not pick up Mr. Trump's papers as the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom did, not honor as a series of people, also very important ally in this landscape, Mark Carney of Canada. There's a balancing act. It's not that the Europeans are saying we agree with you on everything, but there is a kind of tribute. It's not even it's an emotional tribute that's demanded. But if it works, I think, although it offends my values, as a matter of interests, it's fine to do. You just have to draw the line, which I think Europe has done, at throwing Ukraine to the dogs because of Donald Trump's whim. I do think the difference is, it's incredible that Hamas, which is a terrorist organization, is more willing to make a deal with their enemies than is Vladimir Putin. That he's even lower down on the terror scale and the irrationality than Hamas. There has been a long-term project in the Middle East. It is not about any one president. I applauded the Abraham Accords. I applauded the efforts of the Biden administration, and presidents of both parties have worked to bring our Gulf and other Middle East and North African allies together with our ally, Israel. And the release of the hostages is the culmination of that effort. So I think the Europeans, I do not find fault with the Europeans. I would be more disappointed with them if, as a matter of pride, they said, we will not flatter the king, even if it costs support for Ukraine. Then the last thing I'll say is, Today is a day. I spoke while I was here to a large group of students. And I'm very proud about the role of the United States of America in liberating the hostages. I have unmitigated pride and joy to see the hostages come back and to see a ceasefire in that terrible conflict that has cost the lives of so many in Gaza.
Let's not forget 20 are coming or have been coming back alive and 28 dead.
Yes, but in our tradition, it's also an enormous, enormously significant for the dead hostages to be returned. So I don't have any qualification on that, but what will tomorrow look like and the day after? Now, I wanted to say Europe is not completely irrelevant, because tomorrow in Egypt, Mr. Macron and the UK and Canada and Germany and others will be present for a Middle East peace conference. That's all to the good. Whatever my differences, whatever my policy differences, and I think Europe should. So I take no exception to what the Europeans have done, Jan.
Okay. Sigurda, do you want to add something to this, what has been said now?
So I guess not too much, only think since Ukraine was mentioned, I don't think that we have, the problem is that our transactional approach towards support of Ukraine has been starting from 2022, from actually even earlier. And that's why not only Trump must be blamed now. We should look on ourselves. And as for me, then both European and Biden's administration as well, very kind of slowly waking up and very limited support for Ukrainians not to die has led us to a situation where we are at the moment. And we really should take responsibility ourselves as well. And also what I think that we are still missing in this debate is about the fact that it's not only Ukraine under the war with Russia, we are under the war with Russia as well. Yes, it's not conventional, it's hybrid, but let's look at the system of what Russia is doing. Drones, attacks to the critical infrastructure, sabotages, all that. Information operations. Like, for example, we have information operation at the moment against Latvian militaries, where Russian actors are attacking our militaries in order to decrease trust towards them. Let's look on Russian operations in order to decrease trust in our democratic institutions, since we talk about democracies in here. So we are under hybrid war with Russia at the moment. And it's not only about some leaders, it's about our all reaction towards what is happening and non-ability to take responsibilities.
Thanks. Ralph, what do you think, are we in Europe able to prioritize as far as Atlantic relationship is concerned? For instance, to give you an example, American tech companies and all these giant platforms are pushing together with Trump administration for Europe to be more softer in its regulations and to like all these like DSA and GDPR and regulation of artificial intelligence and that. Is it really so necessary to keep our position because if we do this gesture, we might have a friendly relationship with the US as such as also in defense and security? Or should we really insist that this is a priority we should really fight for, like some GDPR or DSA, if we see that American president is so friendly currently with all these giant corporations?
Yeah, I would say basically, of course, we cannot throw out our basic values
well, the
concerning.
Question,
We cannot throw out our basic values also when it comes to regulation of the internet out of the window to comfort Trump. But I would agree to you, we should critically consider and ask ourselves if this kind of regulations we established in the last years really fits to the new reality of the digital world we are entering. And I'm afraid that not only on the area of digital technologies, European has become a champion of regulation, but we are losing ground when it comes to the technology itself. And it is partly because of our overregulation. Yeah, for instance, if you're looking to what is the digital economy about, it's a data economy, and we are shielding data so heavily that they cannot be commercialized. So there are enough reasons to question ourselves if this kind of regulation is really worth to defend it. And I would agree that we should look more for kind of strategic compromises and opportunities for cooperation instead of chasing behind the Fata Morgana of complete European autonomy or independence.
Okay, thank you. So I think we have 10 minutes left, so we have a space for some of the questions from the audience. Okay, so lady over there. Please, if you could introduce yourself and tell the name of the panelists for who you are heading the question, okay?
Thank you very much. My name is Monica Dias. I'm from Lisbon, Portugal, of the Institute of Political Studies. My question is to Mr. Ralph Fuchs, but also other panelists, on something that was not mentioned here directly, but is connected in my view, that is China. So without the support of China, Russia wouldn't be maybe there where it is. And in fact, if we think about reinventing the transatlantic relations, we could also focus on what we have in common and not so much on what is different. So China would be, in fact, a goal, a common goal, where the transatlantic relations could find solutions and must find and can only find solutions together. So I would very much like to hear you on that. Thank you so much.
Sure, I can start. I think you're absolutely right, and this is where a lot of schizophrenia comes from the administration, because they claim at times to be China hawks, but then act in a way that... So a proper strategy, for example, if you want to impose pain on China or decouple our economy from China, okay, so you might take a tariff strategy, perhaps, or a sanction strategy. But you would never do that while also alienating and tariffing your allies. Like an effective China strategy in that regard would be to hug your allies close, right? Hey, we're all in this together, let's isolate China. But rather it was schizophrenic in that regard. I think that it is an area where there should be cooperation in addition on this, we were just talking about on the social media front. So there could have been agreement on TikTok, for example, and where that's headed, although I'm not sure TikTok is that much better in the hands of these broligarchs than it is in the hands of China. Probably it is still slightly better, but yeah, no, I think these are common areas. And I think it's also a hook, I think, for a lot of people on our side of the aisle in the United States. So for example, you know, I do missions to Ukraine, and I recently brought Republican senior staff from Congress to across Ukraine to Kharkiv, et cetera. And one of the biggest issues they have from their constituents is this is a European problem, this is a European problem, this is a European problem. But once they were there and that they learned this is a global theater, this is why China's benefiting from being in Ukraine. This is the technology that they're learning by being in Ukraine. This is how the Iranians are providing weapons to Ukraine. And with that knowledge, it was a real game changer for them. So I think it's not only an important strategy in order for us to create more independence from China by allying ourselves with our allies and standing together, but I also think it's something where you can get bipartisan support in the United States and therefore is a really useful avenue for bringing the alliance together.
Thank you very much. Norman, do you want to add something? Yes.
I think that in the complexity of that dialogue, that part of the dialogues are a two-way street. And when the flattery over Ukraine ends, Europe needs to hold firm on what it deems smart regulation of the big tech firms. Those tech platforms are creating an epidemic, particularly among our young people. Yeah. And we look to Europe for the right balance on regulation and needs to emphasize, so there's some yes, there's some no, and there's some what can we do together. And I think that emphasizing, as Europe talks to the United States, let's partner on China in order to, there is a legitimate rare earths monopolization crisis that we're facing. We all in Europe and the United States, we're going to have to find alternative sources of that. So to emphasize that realpolitik vis-a-vis China, very important part of the discourse.
Thank you very much, Ralph.
But I think it is a two-side question. Yeah, will the Trump administration understand that it needs Europe in building an alliance against China or containing China? And are the Europeans ready to enter this kind of alliance? The state of politics now is, and this is the formula the Europeans starting to agree on, we are reducing our strategic dependence from China, de-risking, because not only in terms of rare earth, but also if you're looking, for instance, to the energy technologies, 80% of the components of renewable energies now are coming from China, including batteries. It's not only solar panels and a lot of other stuff. For most of the big German companies, China still is the profit center. So there is a deep and unilateral dependency. The Europeans are depending more from China than vice versa. And we have to reduce it step by step. There cannot be an abrupt disruption. And the third side element is to counter China in the global south. Yeah, China is, as well as Russia, systematically building alliances in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, and there is a lack of global counter-strategy from the European side. We even are stumbling in ratifying the Mercosur agreement for a trade zone with Latin America. So we have to become much more geopolitical than we are.
Thank you. So we have a last question over there.
Thank you so much. Tamar Jacoby, Progressive Policy Institute. I'm American, but I live in Kyiv. So I have a question about European leadership. As an American watching the slow motion divorce, or whatever it is, I'm so rooting for Europe, but I'm also so frustrated, as everyone I think is, by the pace. And that does seem to me at some level to go back to European leadership. And someone in Europe said to me recently, for 80 years, America proposed and Europe decided yes or no, how are we going to agree, what are we going to do, without America playing that role, how is Europe going to pull itself together to be cohesive enough to do all the things that we wanted to do?
Okay, so also tell us the name of the panelists who should respond, because we have 2 minutes.
The Europeans.
Okay, so it's Sigeta, it's up to you.
Sigita.
Sigita, sorry.
So basically, I think that here I would rather share a certain amount of optimism, taking in consideration how we have seen the ways how Europe is awakening at the moment. If you compare with the pace what we had after 2008, there was 0 pace. After 2014, we already started to be a bit faster, and now we see decisive decisions. And I think in face of intensifying threat, I think we will manage to deal with this. And even with this potential more nationalistic, more even populist in some countries parties, there are still being those who will rule. Still, I think there is a solid basis for being fast enough in reaction in face of real threat.
Thank you very much. So we have to wrap it up, unfortunately. So I'd like to thank all the panelists, Sigeta, Norman, Ralph, and Laura. And I would like to thank all of you for... Thanks.
And thank you.
For coming and listening. And I would like to thank Forum 2000 for providing us with this opportunity. So thanks a lot.